Today we have joining us Andrew Yerbey, who is the Senior Policy Counsel at the Institute. He works on issues related particularly to education. He studied economics at UA, and he got his law degree from Northwestern University School of Law in 2015, and he started working in API in August of 2015 as well. We also have Katherine Robertson with us, and she is the Vice President of the organization. She's API's legislative liaison to our policymakers in Montgomery, and she's charged with communicating API's research and ideas to legislators and their staff. She began her career at the U.S. Department of Justice under the George W. Bush administration, where she assisted in promoting relations with state and local government officials and members of their law enforcement. She also served Senator Jeff Sessions as legislative counsel on the State Judiciary Committee. She graduated from Auburn University and the UA School of Law, and is a member of the Alabama and Tennessee bars. So I want to welcome both of you today, and also to Katie, who has been an extreme help in coordinating all of these efforts. So thank you, Katie, as well. Katie's the executive assistant there at API. For those of you who are joining on the phone and by video conference, we ask that you mute your lines and keep them muted until we open it up for questions. And I'll turn it over to you, Katherine. Thank you.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay, great. We're so excited to be here with you today. You've heard a little bit of our backgrounds, and just to reemphasize, API is what you call a think tank. So policy briefs are basically what we do for a living. It is a pretty narrow niche for attorneys. Attorneys are usually writing, appellate briefs and legal memoranda. So policy brief is a bit of a different type of document. And so Andy and I are both going to walk you through kind of how we approach writing these briefs. The main thing you need to know is you're going to see a lot of examples of text in our slides. We're not here to make any political or policy points, so ignore that. Some are just totally made up just to show you the point we're trying to make, so don't read into that too much. But we did want to give you some examples. We're only going to go for about 45 minutes so that we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, but certainly if you have something pressing we're not making clear, feel free to raise your hand. We'd love to answer your questions. All right, so when you sit down to write a policy brief, first you need to know what policy brief is. I'm sure you probably all know what policy brief is, but for us, we don't define a brief by a particular length. It is a method of communicating research and recommendations to someone that you're trying to influence. It may just be you're trying to influence thought from the general public, or it may be that you want to use your brief to influence a policymaker who's going to take a position or a vote on a specific issue. So the next question is, who is your audience? When we are writing policy briefs for dissemination to the general public, we take a different view than a policy brief written for a legislator or a head of a state agency or a city council person. So you need to know who you're writing to, because if it's someone with expertise in the subject you're addressing, you can start at a much higher level than if you're going with the general public who may not know anything about the topic at hand. And then the last question is, what question or need is my brief going to answer? You don't want to just put out a brief that merely summarizes information. You want your brief to have a very specific purpose and to answer either a specific question or a specific challenge or a need that's out there in the world of public policy. Policy briefs that identify problems without offering solutions are typically pretty useless to policymakers. If you're going to convince a policymaker to read something you've written, they want to take away some advice from it. They don't want to just know information. It's not a research paper, it's a policy brief, because you do come to some sort of conclusion or recommendation. So the first question is to choose your topic. And it's kind of the same way you did in high school or college. When you sit down to write a research paper, you have a broad topic, but you got to find a way to whittle that down to something that you can actually cover in one document. So our steps that we sort of put together are, you pick a topic, you make it a little more specific, and then a little more specific. You eliminate any vague words and narrow your language, then write out your topic in a complete sentence, and then write that out in a sentence that argues your point. So I'm going to give you some examples. So let's say I give one of my analysts the topic education policy. So then they might think, okay, well, what are we trying to accomplish? We want to improve academic outcomes. Well, who has influence over academic outcomes? Teachers. Okay, so teacher performance. All right, well, what's the topic that is debated a lot about teacher performance? Teacher tenure. Then you end up with a paper forming teacher tenure. It gets you back to your original point, improving academic outcomes as an education policy. So your sentence might be teacher tenure laws originally enacted to protect good teachers from being fired without cause, now serve to keep bad teachers from being fired with cause. And that's your topic. And that's what everything else is going to flow from. Here's another example. Let's say I give a policy analyst, hey, we need to address what's going on in Alabama's budget. Okay, that's a huge topic. So, okay, let's narrow that down. Spending on public education. All right, well, spending on pre-K, impact of pre-K spending on academic outcomes, impact of pre-K spending on academic outcomes in Alabama's poorest school district. That's a narrow enough topic that you can tackle in one policy brief. So your sentence might read, while Alabama's poorest school districts have the highest enrollment in pre-K, the program has no significant impact on improving academic outcomes for these students. And again, that's a made-up sentence, but just to make a point, that might be your topic sentence. And so everything else you're writing in that brief, you need to make sure that it's relevant to that sentence that you landed on, because that's your topic. And then what new information does my brief bring to the table? This is one thing that I get stuck on sometimes when I'm writing a brief, because, you start reading all of this research and you're like, well, this point's already been made, that point's already been made. What am I really bringing to the table? Sometimes what you're bringing to the table is applying that research to what's going on in your state or your city or your district or, whoever it is that your audience is. That information might be new to them, and they may not have read that information in a way that's applied to the specific circumstances at hand. So, in your case, it might be Birmingham specific. There's bodies of research on any topic under the sun, but a lot of times those things haven't been applied to Alabama or to a specific area. So think in those terms. It doesn't have to be a completely new idea, just a complete new way of applying the information. So your research is your next thing. Once you choose your topic, then you've got to do your research before you ever pick up your pen. Obviously, research. Policy briefs should be full of references to more substantial bodies of research, because again, this isn't an academic research paper that you're writing, it's a policy brief. So you're going to be reading papers that might be 100 pages long to use information for a paper that might be 5 pages long. So what's going to be important is that pretty much every single thing you say, every sentence, every point you make needs to be backed up by a more substantial body of research. Your brief will be far more persuasive if your facts and recommendations are supportive of academic research, but it will also give the reader a sense of your expertise in the topic. If you have a ton of footnotes at the end of a short brief, that proves to the reader that you've done your due diligence, you've done a lot of reading preparation before writing, and that you're actually equipped to have expertise in the topic you're writing on. Be aware that all references are not created equal. You have to make sure you're citing to reputable sources. So if you want to cite to, an op-ed, you might want to be careful about that, because that's, opinion. Or if you are making a point that's very commonly made by a particular group or institute, you might be better off trying to find research from a group that typically would have an opposing point of view. So I'll give you an example. There are two think tanks we typically cite to: Kaiser Family Foundation and Urban Institute. We may not agree on all points, but when we're able to use their positions to help support our research, that's even more convincing, because we're not coming from the same perspective. So keep that in mind. It's really important as you're researching to not only find a research that supports what you're saying, but also know the opposition. You really can't write a good policy brief if you don't know the other side of the argument you're making, because those are really the points that you're going to end up kind of having to address. Those are the points that you're trying to persuade people on. So here's an example. I was writing a paper recently on federal funding in Alabama. So my argument is relying on federal funding to operate Alabama's state government results in a loss of state authority over key decisions. Well, I know that the other side of the argument is that by taking federal money, Alabamians benefit from the tax dollars they send to Washington plus some. So I have to address that. Now, I might not want to come out and say in a sentence, many people would argue that I'm wrong because blah, 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 but how I might want to frame it is, I won't read all of this, but the last sentence, to be clear, Alabama gets back almost the exact same money that it sends to Washington in the form of federal gas tax. So transportation money with all its burdens and strings attached is far from a boon to the state. So I've addressed the argument, but I haven't called it out, but I've given you information to persuade you that, the opposition's argument might not be sound. So then you have to think about your writing style, and that's really important. There's so many different writing styles for briefs, and we even use a variety of writing styles in our organization, because we put out information in a lot of different formats. There's social media writing, there's policy brief writing, there's an op-ed style writing. Sometimes you're being purely objective, sometimes you're trying to be persuasive, and sometimes you're just giving your opinion. So your writing really matters. A policy brief is going to be primarily fact-based, but it will have persuasive tones to it. They'll try to give you some examples. So this point right here, you might say an op-ed, a state-run lottery would rely on the poor to feed government and attempt to justify it by promising that proceeds would create government programs to serve the poor. You could write that in an op-ed and just move on to your next point, but in a policy brief, you've got to prove that. You can't just say something that's that loaded and move on. So your follow-up would be, you looked at the data. The 10 poorest counties in Georgia spend more than richer counties that don't get the same educational aid back to the community. So that's fact-based. So I can say something that sounds like an opinion, then I back it up in fact. You can't just say something and then move on. You gotta prove it. So fact-based, but persuasive. You're intertwining the facts and the application of the research with persuasive language. But you also want to make sure you're using subtle rather than emotional language, because a policy brief is not should not be worded the same way as political speeches or rhetoric. That's not persuasive at all, because it shows that you've already reached a conclusion without the facts to back it up. So here's two ways to look at it. Right now, we've talked a lot about Medicaid funding in Alabama. So the governor has said if Alabama does not raise revenues, children will die. Okay, but if you're writing a policy brief, you can't use that kind of language. You want to say stagnant or decreasing state revenue has led to insufficient funding for critical government services, including children's health care. That's still a persuasive statement, but if you had said the first statement, if they disagreed with that, they totally tune out everything else you got on the page, because that seems, overplayed.
Can you say that if you can improve the number of people that have died in a certain amount of time as a result of lack of funding or because and I can take that question later, but that's a very explosive statement you just made. I feel personally about.
Now, we're just talking about writing style. We're not talking about whether these statements are true or false. These two sentences can lead you to the same exact conclusion. I'm just saying, if you open with the top sentence, you may lose your reader because it seems like it could not be true.
Say how many deaths the result as a result of that, you can still say that, as opposed to just, to me, it's softer to say including children's health care as opposed to the loss of lives. But you're saying the policy brief is appropriate.
You could even make a statement. If you can prove it, you still got to be careful about your language, because if you are going to make an explosive point and you do have the data, I still almost think a softer lead-in can be important, because you are trying to still appear objective, and then you lay out the data. You make a good point, but you don't want to lose your reader by being too polarizing with the opening statement. You want to lay it out for them, and then, boom, at the end, if you want to say that your conclusion, that would probably be more appropriate time for that, kind of language, if that makes sense. Yes, ma'am.
So, is there a happy medium? Because the second sentence, to me, it could belong in that paper.
Sure.
But the first sentence, can you say if Alabama does not raise revenue, children will suffer?
Yeah.
Which is not quite so inflammatory.
You could say that, as long as you're able to back it up to think that's a softer runway into the point you're trying to make. But again, you've got to know your audience. So if you're writing this to the chairman of a budget committee, you're going to want to use the second sentence. If you're writing it to the general public, you're going to want to say more like what you said. So again, that goes back to knowing your audience, who you're writing to. If you're talking to people that are surely looking at numbers and data and stuff like that, you're going to use a more academic tone. But you'll know to adjust that based on your audience. The other thing is there are going to be weaknesses. Every argument has a weakness to it. And you don't just want to skim over those as if you don't realize that there are any shortcomings to your argument. So you always want to lay that out, but then make a stronger point about while you're writing. In legal writing, a lot of times you want to put your weakness behind like an although. You know, you want to have a clause, although the legislation would generate additional revenue. A study shows that new revenue would not keep pace, blah, blah, blah. So you want to kind of hit on the weakness, but then back it up with why your point is better. And we have got some handouts for you guys on writing styles that we won't get too deep into, but they're over there on that little table. But there are some suggestions on how to structure your sentences to be persuasive, but not skipping over the fact that there might be weaknesses to your argument. Your brief needs to be concise. Now, it's not important that you say it can only be 3 pages or only be 5 pages. I mean, that's arbitrary. But you just need to be as concise as possible. Once you start researching, you're going to have so many hundreds of pages of information. Being concise can be one of the most difficult parts of your brief because you've got so much information, you almost feel like you're cheating the reader if you're not including it all. But the fact is, the reader's going to put it down if they can't absorb your main points early on. And I think about, we often work with the Alabama legislature. They're part-time. They all have full-time jobs elsewhere, and they're in Montgomery a couple weeks out of the year. If I take them a 50-page paper, I might as well put it in the shredder before I ever walk into their office because it will not get read. And again, this is all based on your audience. If you're writing to an academic crowd, they may well read a 50-page policy brief. If you're writing to a policy maker, they won't. So keep that in mind, and that's why that kind of takes me back to my original point about narrowing your topic. You got to get your topic narrow enough to be able to make a full argument in a short space. So if you're finding yourself getting to 20, 30, 40 pages, the issue may be that you haven't narrowed your topic enough. But being concise is so important. And Andy's going to touch on this too, but we, as I mentioned, we have different kind of mechanisms for communicating policy ideas. Sometimes we'll have a policy brief that might be 15 pages, and then we'll narrow it down to a 1 or 2 page document that's got more bullet points, and then for social media, we might narrow it down to just a picture. So you're taking 100 pages of information, putting it into 10, putting it into 2, putting it into a graphic. And sometimes, this day and age in the digital world where people read headlines and move on, we kind of have to adapt in our writing. And you always want to pick your very best arguments. You might have 20 reasons why something needs to happen on X, Y, or Z. But maybe your strongest arguments, maybe are 3 or 4 that really just hit the ball out of the park. So focus on those. You don't need to make every good point under the sun. They won't read past the first 2 or 3. So pick your strongest arguments and put those at the beginning, and then wrap up as quickly as you can after you've hit those points. So many times, most of us in this room are going to be writing policy briefs that deal with numbers, right? Either spending numbers or health-related numbers, health numbers. A lot of times when you're dealing with numbers, charts are the best way to quickly make your point, because sometimes it'll take a couple of paragraphs to say what one pie chart or bar chart might show. So I mentioned I was writing a paper about Alabama's reliance on federal funding. Well, the paper is about 20 pages right now, which is way too long. Do not follow that rule. But I can almost prove my entire point in one chart. So when you see federal versus states, you can be pretty convinced by those numbers that Alabama is pretty reliant on federal funding because the 2 colors are so close together. So you don't really even need to read my whole paper to see that Alabama is pretty reliant on federal government. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andy, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about how to structure a policy brief. And again, this all plays back to how can you get the reader to make it through your whole brief. So he's going to talk through those points, and I'm going to come up and conclude at the end.
Are y'all going to share your slides?
Yes, we are going to email y'all our slides after this.
So can I ask you a question?
Yes.
And I don't know if you're going to talk, because you were going to talk about the audience as well.
Yes.
So my question was, when you write it, do you talk to the audience before? I mean, how do you know which three main points are going to be the ones that are really going to, you know what I'm saying?
I
So
think
you need to know your audience a
you,
little bit better.
well, you know, sometimes, I mean, like for instance, it is the general public. You can't get to know your audience better. The best way to know the points you need to make if you're trying to reach a wide audience is by every time you read an academic paper or any piece of research you use to prepare, you're going to start seeing common themes. You know, you're going to start seeing, like, for instance, when you're writing a legal brief, you'll see the same case cited over and over again on, you know, breach of contract or whatever. And it's the same with policy writing. You'll see, you know, if you Google, like, you know, regressive taxes, you're going to kind of start seeing a theme. And they're going to be like the same couple of points for you and the same couple of points against you. And you're going to know, you can't write on this topic without addressing these things. Now, if you're writing to a smaller audience, like for instance, if you were writing a brief to the Alabama legislature, you're going to have to do some research to know what they already know. Right? And the way you figure that out is you kind of read the news, you kind of see what they're saying in the press and those type of things. And if you see them saying, well, we don't know, or we think this or that, that's going to kind of steer you towards, you know, if you're writing to a city council and you've listened to debate or read about the debate in the newspaper about what they've been talking about, that's going to kind of help you figure out, like, if they're not with you, where are they missing the point? If they're with you, what points do you need to bolster? So knowing your audience helps you pick, but then also doing the research, you'll start seeing a theme and know kind of what you need to include. Does that make sense? Okay.
Anything?
So if we could just allow a few moments for those who are joining us by video conference or on telephone. If you have a question, if you can unmute your line, we want to make sure we give you an opportunity to ask any further question that you have. All right, if not, Andy?
Okay. Probably began, Katherine alluded to this handout we gave everyone. It's just sort of a short primer on some of the things we discussed about writing well and to do, not to do, putting together your own writing tool to get what you should have in your desk at all times, just to check your grammar, your usage, etc. Because you never want to be caught using, say, empathetic or sympathetic. There's differences in two words, and there are people that will just miss you off the bat for using a correct word. So I brought a few of the books that I have in my toolkit, which is a lot longer. This is a good one. It discusses just general usage and style. We'll get this in a minute. This is for citation. This is another book that's basically, it's quite amazing word. Any word that you've ever wondered the distinction between two similar words has a whole essay there explaining why. So that's very handy to have to do that. And then this is another book that is for citations. So we'll get back to that here. So my topic is a little drier than Katherine's. So, sorry. Can everyone hear me now? Is that good? I'll just be discussing here ways of structure. So as you can see, there are many different ways of structuring a policy brief. The one way here is title, summary, recommendations, introduction, the body, which is your main argument, then the policy implications and your conclusions. But there's also other things you can add, such as boxes and sidebars, and all of these things, if they're not familiar to you with what that means, we're going to go into cases, tables, graphics, photographs. And then finally, there's just sort of some housekeeping stuff that you need to include. And then that would be the masthead, which is we'll discuss more about what that is. The authors, acknowledgments, publication details, and references. So we'll go through those. So first off, the title. This is actually a very important part of a policy brief because you want something that is catchy, something someone wants to read. So it needs to be short. If you've ever read scientific literature, like the medical sciences, their titles are usually like paragraph long, and it sort of deters you from ever wanting to pick that thing up. So you want it to be short, catchy, and to the point, and basically to just in a very brief form say what it is you're going to talk about, and make people want to read about it. On the slides, they just mentioned that we'll be handing them out to you. You'll be able to see this clear. I won't go through it right now, but it's just sort of some examples of what I'm talking about. So, a summary section. We don't usually include this in our policy briefs, but some do. It can be a good way of just leading into the policy brief. If you'll look at probably the best illustration of a policy brief that we brought would be the Alabama Prison Transformation Initiative Act, and the issue snapshots is sort of our synopsis. It not only sort of explains what it's about, but also our position is very quickly. And that's actually an example of a box, which we'll get to here in a moment. And again, these will all be on the PowerPoints when we get there. So recommendations. You don't have to put the recommendations at the end. We generally do. It's all about how you want to, what you want to convey in recommendations. So you could argue that our issue snapshot here is a recommendation, at least implicitly, because it says it would be an act of fiscal irresponsibility for the legislature to pass it. So our recommendation would be don't pass it, right? But we usually include, you'll see at the end, a recommendation section that just sort of expound upon why, and brings everything together at the end and sort of ties everything together. But that's up to you, and that's up to the subject, whether or not you want to include that. As always, like Katherine was saying, always be clear, easy to understand. Clarity is always key. And again, going back to what Katherine was saying, you want to think about what you are recommending and not recommend the whole kit caboodle, because you'll easily lose people on that. You have a goal, you simplify that goal, and you state it simply. And of course, realistic, don't ask for the world. So the introduction section. This is another thing that we usually don't include, but it's also implicit in our background section. So first, let's discuss it. It should grab reader's attention. It introduces the topic. It says why it's important, and it tells the reader why he or she should do something about it. Now, point 4 doesn't come into play here, but if you'll read that very first paragraph of our background, I think they'll see the first 3 are. It explains that overcrowding is terrible in Alabama. It gives some pretty shocking statistics about how we're at 180% capacity. And it's attention grabbing. So at that point, regardless of what side take on the issue, both sides will see that the problem needs to be addressed. And then we go on to give more background and how we would address it. Katherine, how many on time? Okay. So these are sort of extraneous things that can include. I won't just read these slides to you. You can go back to these later. I'm just going to hit on the most important points as I see them. And these, and there's another example. So the body here would be our analysis section of the policy brief that we hand out. So it needs to flow in a logical manner. I know we keep harping on this, but keep things short, keep things simple. It is very helpful, especially to lawmakers, to use headings and subheadings. And if you'll notice in the policy brief that we hand out here, not only do we use main headings and subheadings, but our subheadings actually are arguments themselves. So the plan will not produce the savings claimed and will cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. And then we go on to explain why we think that is. So that would be a helpful way of doing your headings, doing a main heading and then an argumentative heading that can be sort of provocative and draw the reader in. And like it says there, a lot of subheadings every 2 to 4 paragraphs. These are all general rules. They're not. You're free to break them, but politicians' attention spans are short. So. Sure.
So, in your analysis, you asked the plan where you state that the plan would not produce a savings claim and would cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. And then you state a different argument that the plan would not solve the crowding problem. Then you say again, yeah, it would cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. And so that just for emphasis on, hoping people will realize that cost.
That's exactly right.
It's not in the background. I mean, had I read the background, I might not be asking this question.
Yeah, and people in this room might disagree with our analysis on this. But yes, you're exactly right. That is a dry point, huh? It's so that they see this is our argument, and it would cost tax. So basically, what we're saying is you're wasting millions of dollars.
So that's the basic point you're trying to drive home with your analysis.
That's right.
Money, and this is why this is a waste of money.
By repetition, yes. So. Any other questions? So policy implications. I believe we have. This can be short. I think that I changed on this particular policy brief, policy implications to analysis. So I combined them here just to make, just because the subject matter lends itself to that. But we'll go through that. It can, with all of these things, like I said, they're not a set rule. You can depart from them, but they are good guidelines to stick by. So as we do here in an analysis with the fact that it would not produce a savings, but would be claimed it would cost taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars. So we discuss the effects of the revised policies, which it would cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, etc. And then below that, we discuss the advantages and disadvantages of each policy option. And then the conclusion. Not every policy brief needs a conclusion. Our conclusion is usually the recommendation, but you could just easily call it. You could just easily have a conclusion and move recommendation up front or elsewhere, and that'll be touched on here in a second. Where elsewhere might be. Again, keep it short, keep it simple. lots of times, especially people with legal or academic writing backgrounds, what you're taught is to say what you want to say it, and then say what you said. So you're repeating yourself in the conclusion. That's generally not effective with a policy brief because you're limited in space. So really, you want to bring something new to each and every section, something that is effective in your argument. So boxes and sidebars, this is what I just referred to about other places that you could discuss your recommendations. We have one right there at the top, but you can have them throughout the policy brief. The type of information that you can put in there are cases, like case studies or anecdotes, definitions or explanations for things that the layman would not understand. And of course, always remember that your audience is not going to understand a technical term, usually, unless you're writing for an audience that would. So if you're writing for doctors, technical terms might work, but if you're writing for the public and most politicians, don't use technical terms, use normal, everyday language. And then just other information that does not flow in the text. You can set it off into a box or sidebar, lists, and examples. So anything that goes in there, you don't want for people who read a box, the content of a box, to have to go back and refer to the text to know what they're talking about. I might be dating myself, but I remember Illustrated Reader, or I think that was what it was called. They used to have boxes of like little stories about people that like illustrated the policy that was being explained in like history textbooks. And that's basically what it's saying here. So everything in that box is self-contained. Although in the text you can often refer to the boxes to say, for more insight, see chart B, or it wouldn't be chart, but box B or whatnot. Cases, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's essentially either an actual case or just an anecdote that drives your points. Again, short, simple, self-contained, and as Katherine was saying, focus on your subjects, keep it lean, don't resist the urge to go off on tangents outside of your subject. Streamline your policy brief. Tables. Katherine also touched on this. It's a great way to table and charts are a great way to very quickly convey hard to understand information. For example, let's see. So if you saw, this is one of our publications, if you saw that graph at the top, the red one, and we said it was something bad, it's pretty clear that it's going up and that's bad. And so as opposed to writing a paragraph talking about just how bad it is, especially nowadays with the millennials in the audience and the younger people, they're very visual. So visual aids are very, very helpful. And as Katherine talked about, sometimes we'll write a big report, boil it down to a policy brief, and then we have to convey it on social media. And easily the best form is an infographic or a chart or things of that such. This is sort of, I'm going to let you guys come back to this. It's a good little guide when you're putting together your tables. It's very helpful, no more than 4 columns and 6 rows. It's just a matter of attention span and complexity. You don't want it to be too complex for your audience. But this will be a good reference to come back to whenever you are creating tables to help you convey what you want to convey. The same with this slide. But above all, you must make it easy for the reader to quickly read and understand the information that you are trying to present. So in this situation, think about Wall Street Journal. If you ever read the Wall Street Journal, and they have all sorts of graphs or the economists, any graph they have in there, you can almost instantly understand the graph without having to read each of the axes to see what it's about. So you want to go for that. You want to go for something easy, because if you make it hard on the reader to decipher what's going on in the graph, they're not going to. Graphics, again, with millennials, they're great. We always try to, maybe some people think this is great, maybe some people think this is not so great, but something that is eye-catching that can bring people in, and, who is this little girl? We do want to read about her, yes we do. Hopefully, unless felt. And again, these are things that you can go back to whenever you are inserting graphics into your policy reports, making them legible, always in an explanatory title or caption, and etc. Photographs, millennials, they love them. So include photographs wherever you can. Of course, of most importance is make sure you own the copyright to that photo. You don't want to, as I'm guessing most nonprofit, or work for nonprofit, or work for some sort of organization like that, you don't want to be sued with budgets already strained because you used a very famous photograph. And here's another slide you can reference in the future. This is more like a tips for printing. You want a certain dots per inch. It's technical stuff. The masthead, this basically just gives the organization's logo. If it were part of the series, then you give the issue number. But most importantly, and this should really be stressed, always give the date that you publish it, because if someone wants to cite you and you want people to cite you, they need that date. Always give the author's name, and always acknowledge anyone that helped in the creation of the work, including people who helped fund that work. And Katherine's already talked about footnotes and endnotes. For footnotes and endnotes, you don't have to be real strict. Those Blue Book and Chicago Manual style are helpful guides, but really the most important thing is within your documents to be consistent with it. Katherine?
And I think the most important question, although there are a lot of important questions, but maybe one of the most important is how to actually get your brief out. You've spent all these hours writing, you've spent all these hours editing and researching, and you've chosen the perfect photograph with 300 dots per inch for Andy's instructions. And then you got to figure out how to get somebody to read it. And again, as we discussed in every slide, I mean, everything you're doing, you're thinking, how can I get people to read this? I mean, that goes from your very beginning to your very end. But you got to figure out how to get it out. So just a couple of things we've learned. Just to go back quickly to something Andy said, he held up the example research paper that we handed out to you with the child on the front. One time about 10 years ago, some representatives of our think tank went to a national conference on like education policy or something like that. And they asked our team to stand up. They were giving out all these different awards for different research, and they asked our team to stand up. And this was before my time, but the team stood up and they were really excited. They thought they were about to get an award, and they said, "Y'all win the award for the absolute worst looking research paper in this whole place." And they were so embarrassed. It was kind of like satire, but it was true because the front page was just white, and it had a title real small and red like an apple. Like how generic for an education paper. And so we have spent, and it helps that we have a young team. We actually have a lot of millennials on our team, so we test them to see how things are going. I'm technically a millennial, and so is he. I don't know why he's bashing them. But so we've really worked hard on the aesthetics of everything, and that seems so silly when you're smart and experienced and done all this work to be spending hours poring over iStock photos. But the key issue is if you pick a crappy iStock photo, they might not ever open the paper and see all the hard work you've done. So Andy spent a lot of time picking that child because it's intriguing. You see her from the back. She's in class. You don't know what her story is. And it makes you at least crack open. You know, it's just like a book. They say don't judge it by its cover, but people do. So consider that as you're thinking about it. You don't want to have too much text, and you want to have a compelling graphic photo, what have you. So anyway, getting it to the people that want to read it. For us, we sometimes, if we have to, we will mail policy briefs to legislators. But it's far better if you can deliver them in person. And that gets tricky. For us, we have 140 of them. That can be difficult. But if I can visit with 30 of them, I'm going to be pretty sure that 20 of those 30 are going to read it. And that may yield more result than mailing 140 of them. So if you are trying to make an appeal to, let's say, a board of UAB, or you're trying to make an appeal to the Birmingham City Council, you're better off taking copies of your brief, trying to visit with each one of them individually, tell them, I'm the one that wrote this, I did all the research, I'd really like for you to take time to read it. I guarantee your chances go up by about 90% if you do that, because otherwise it's just another piece of junk mail. I mean, working at a think tank, people send us their research all the time. I bet you I read one every 100 briefs that we get sent, you know, because it's just, but if somebody took the time to come to our office and say, hey, we're from so-and-so, we wrote this, we're really proud of it, we think you really need to read it, I mean, I'd probably at least glance at it, right? So, and it's not always feasible to deliver it in person, but if you can, I mean, if it's somebody local, somebody in your department, what have you, try to deliver it personally. Again, aesthetics, not just the cover, but throughout. Andy touched on all this. You can flip through the paper he brought to see, you know, headings, clean margins, things like that. If you open a document, and I'm sure we all have, be it a magazine or a newspaper or even a research paper, if it looks cluttered and like your brain's going to have to work overtime, nobody's going to read it. So clean margins, lots of white space, not on the cover, on the inside, that'll help people read it. And then we've touched on social media. Social media may not be your medium. It may not be your audience, depending on what you're doing. But if you're talking about public policy and you're trying to influence and persuade people, chances are you're probably going to have to employ social media. And there are plenty of websites and handouts. I mean, we could do a whole presentation on social media because we've really had to learn it over the past 3 or 4 years, you know, how to best utilize those outlets. But again, the key to social media is to pull out one quote or one chart or even one picture and put something provocative, like a lot of times posed in the form of a question. You'll see that a lot on Twitter, like, hey, did you hear what happened today? And then you click the link and you're like, I'm such a sucker, but that worked. So think about that. You know, if you're writing a paper on, you know, the one I was working on, Alabama's federal dependency, hey, did you know that Alabama took in almost as many dollars from Washington this year as it did from the state? Like, that's kind of interesting, right? I mean, you might at least click the link. So the link might take you to your brief, and then the brief could lead you to a longer research paper. But, you know, the key is on social media, you don't ever want to say, read our policy brief on reforming teacher tenure. Like, you will get 0 clicks. You want to put something that's interesting, they're going to click on, that will lead them to your stuff. And at that point, you want to send your brief to media. If you're really trying to get your message out and it's a really public policy campaign, don't overlook the media because, for instance, like the Birmingham Business Journal, if it's financial or economics related, they usually like that. So don't forget to send it to them because they might write a story about how great your brief is, or at least cite to your brief in a story that they're writing on a relevant topic. And it may be a year after you've published it, but if they kind of have it in their file, they might use it. We get calls all the time for things we've written a long time ago that different newspapers hung on to. They thought it was interesting, and they end up citing it, a year or two later, which is fine. And lastly, again, if you're really trying to influence some type of public policy where people will be voting, or legislature voting, city council, board, what have you, you may find it helpful to also write an op-ed that is even shorter than your policy brief, but where you can insert, we were talking about the different ways to word something. That would be the perfect place to use that first sentence. And I was comparing, one was kind of like out there and one was kind of dry. You can say whatever you want when it's under your name and it's an opinion. So you can actually take information from your policy brief that adds some flavor to it that you couldn't get away with in a policy brief, but you can under your own name and an opinion editorial. And so a lot of times, for instance, my paper on Alabama's federal dependency is probably really dry to a lot of people. Now I have some great graphics and some great photos, but it still might be dry. But it'll be more interesting if under my own name and in my own voice, I can summarize my findings, but also just throw in some opinion statements. And that is more likely to get printed in newspapers, but will refer people to my policy brief. So they might only get, 600 words of what I'm trying to say. But if it's interesting to them, they're going to go look up my policy brief and read it and see if I know what I'm talking about, maybe. So that's another suggestion. And newspapers are dying, and websites are dying for content. People need content. And a newspaper can publish a brief, but they would publish a well-written op-ed that would point people to your brief. So keep that in mind. That's not going to apply in every case. There are just some topics that just aren't going to be juicy enough for an op-ed. But some will be, so don't overlook that as a tool to kind of help yourself get your message out. And that's all I've got. So Annie and I will take any questions you might have. That was a crash course in policy brief writing. But I think you all have learned a lot, and we love to take your questions. Yes, ma'am.
This is my last question.
No, they're welcome.
So your example of the city council and then the legislature and places like that.
Right.
Why would I spend time trying to appeal to millennials if that's my audience?
Great question. So sometimes you wouldn't. Right? Sometimes you would. There are issues where...
Let's not be elected president.
Sure. Sure. So that's a great question. That goes back to, your audience and what you're trying to accomplish. So there are times, for instance, if we're working on some minute detail of some budget issue that we know the general public is not going to care about, there's really no way to get them to care about it, we will totally skip the general public as an audience and go straight to the legislature, and even more specific, go straight to the members of the budget committee. Because we know they're already at a high enough level for us to just go straight to the point and make our case, right? So in that instance, forget millennials. They're not going to have any influence over this one little thing. We're trying to get some money unearmarked. You don't make that plea to the general public. But if it's a broader public policy issue, you're going to need the people that have the power to feel some influence from their constituents, whoever that may be. And so that's when you need millennials, that's when you need whoever you can get. But millennials are the ones that are on social media for the most part, and that's why we keep mentioning them. But sometimes you need kind of a groundswell and a grassroots approach, and sometimes you don't. But it just depends on the topic and who you're trying to influence. But that would be kind of the difference.
I thought you were going to say, like, when I was in Washington, and when I was doing a fellowship, and the people were really, really young that we were interacting with.
Right.
And I was just wondering if the intern or the millennials are the ones that's actually reading the brief and then telling the elected official, hey, I think this is really cool.
That's a good point. And in Washington, if you're writing briefs to a United States Senator or a congressman, you raise a very good point. I mean, I was 24 and basically trying to advise the senator what to do on a specific set of issues. And so I was a millennial, and I definitely would have read the papers with the good pictures. And that's just, but in most scenarios other than that one, you're typically making your appeal straight to the person that has the power. But you're going to know, is this something where they're putting their finger in the wind, seeing where the public is, and that's when you got to go public. Like, I'll give you an example, and again, you can disagree or agree, whatever, but like right now we're talking about a state lottery. Well, we have two choices. We can either try to appeal to the whole general public and explain all of our positions, or we can try to work with the legislature directly. So, well, we're trying to do both, right? In this case, because the legislators are all at home in their districts going, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do? So in that case, you need to be communicating with the general public. Now, I mentioned earlier, if we're talking about, unearmarking money for the, Bass Trail or some dumb thing in the budget, like if we think that doesn't need to be funded, which I'm, again, just totally making this up, but if we don't think that needs to be funded, we're not going to go to the general public and make that case. We're going to go to the budget chairman, show them some numbers, and be like, hey, this money would be better off somewhere else. That's not, we don't need millennials. We're not even going to do a social media campaign. We're just going to have our information, our brief ready for that very narrow audience. Does that answer your question? Okay. We typically use Chicago writing style in our office.
Yes.
That's an Andy question. Come on.
As far as writing style goes, Chicago manual style is more of a citation. It explains how to cite things mostly, but it has an award-winning grammatical section in there about writing. It's actually written by Brian Garner, and I would recommend this was just recently published, and it's basically an expanded version of what's in the Chicago Manual of Style on usage and grammar and that and those sorts of things. So that's what I would recommend, this book right here, which is the Chicago Guide to Grammar Usage and Punctuation. It's very simple to read, and it's got great index, and can't go wrong with it.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. We're from a sister grant that is looking at the social determinants of health and how health disparities exist.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the South TCC team, and we're generating, after several years, we're generating publications and research. And we're trying to take this research and almost do the opposite. Take this research and try to find the policies, pulling trends out and then taking it upline. Because as a funded from the NIH, we can't affect policy, we can educate on policy. So it's almost like a real broad topic, and we're trying to pinpoint what are the policies that some of these issues that our findings and conclusions of these papers are starting to come out. How to go about it. It's so wrong.
So let me make sure I understand. You're trying to kind of figure out where your information would be useful in policy making?
Well, yes.
Okay. I've never thought about it backwards. You're kind of doing the backwards. I think that you got to figure out who is making the policy recommendations to figure out who might need your information. So, for instance, there are a ton of think tanks in D.C. that are massive, have huge budgets, and their research gets a lot of attention, but it's definitely more policy recommendation based. So, you're going to kind of have to figure out who's influencing policy. So, like in Alabama, you might come to us and say, I understand that y'all work on policy briefs. I don't know if you've seen this data. So, you kind of got to figure out the source of who's having influences, be that in Washington, Montgomery, a city council, a hospital, who's making the decisions, who's influencing the policy, and share with them the data and try to have those conversations. A lot of times we seek out academics, so we're kind of doing the reverse. We're constantly looking for studies that have already been done to see if we can prove our hypothesis or not. So I don't guess I know the perfect answer to your question, but I think you should gear your target to who's influencing the policy making and try to make sure that they're exposed to your data. And, do your own research. If you are seeing things out there, I mean, like a lot of times, the way we come up with an idea for a project is to see something out there that we don't think is right or hasn't been very strongly proven. So if you're kind of keeping tabs on news and articles related to your topic and you think your research either supports or opposes that, send it to the author. We do that all the time. We do that all the time. Hey, we saw your article. You raised a good point. Here's another way to look at it. Here's some data we pulled. You could have a communications type person on your team that does that and tries to make sure that, because then what will happen is the next time that person or think tank puts out a paper, they'll say, we said this, but there's also another point of view. This data proves X,
And we were considering, do we go to Washington with some of this information, and a better option might be to go to some of the think tanks, as an intermediary. It may be easier to.
You can pretty easily figure out which think tanks are heavily involved in healthcare policy, for instance, and that would probably be a better bang for your buck if you were going to do meetings. Mm-hmm. What else?
Because where is the line between education and influencing? We're all funded by NIH grants, and so well. So actually, I was one thing that I noticed when I was reading your recommendation. Recommendations really strong, something that we don't do. Right? We usually present our results. We say, we should consider this. So you guys are very, this is a bad idea. So like, okay, that's, everything else, that's strong. So we put the information together, we give suggestions, but it's never that direct and strong like that. And this is, yeah.
So all of our policy briefs aren't that direct.
Okay.
So we could have brought several. So sometimes, like for instance, like if the United States Supreme Court rules on something that's of interest, we know that people are going to want to know about that case, but untrained legal minds are not going to be able. But we might have an opinion, and even if we did, it wouldn't matter because it's already happened, right? So a lot of times we'll do a policy brief that just merely helps people understand a complex issue and does not come to any particular thing, but it has an analysis section where it's not our opinion in any way. We're not trying to influence anything, but we're analyzing what happened, what it means, what this could mean for the future. And that's a different type of brief, and that's probably more what you're doing. You don't always have to be trying to get something changed. A lot of times policy briefs are. But everything we've talked about, structure and how you're writing, everything would totally apply in what you're talking about, because we write like that too. We just brought you one of Andy's more strongly worded briefs.
I want to go back to Lori, but you're referring more to the fact that each funded we're not supposed to influence policy. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we put together the evidence. So we're not supposed to. But in this case, I think the point is we want to, our effort is first of all make people aware of the issues that we're studying.
Mm-hmm.
And then bring out the research and bring it in a language that is going to be understood by the policymakers.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And hopefully influence that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's, most policy briefs' main objective is going to be to educate and inform. And occasionally you might have an active step there at the end, but everybody's main goal in writing these is to help people better understand the issue. So everything we've said completely applies.
So when you do the research and then you go back to your policy, so my issue is I'm not sure that we know how to talk to the policymakers in the sense that in our research paper, we may mention some outcomes, some things that that's not what they care really about. They would understand, but they don't quite. If you frame it another way, that's what they.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the impact of the number of people because what they're interested in, the voting people. before, right? So maybe it's just, how do you deal with that? I mean, how do you translate what you read in our research papers into a language that they...
Well, I totally understand your question, and I think that goes back to, these slides you'll be able to look back to as a reference. But I think that's the struggle of any wonky type person, which we are. I mean, we love to get in the weeds and details. We would love to have charts upon charts upon charts. But it all goes back to knowing your audience and narrowing your topic. And if you've written a research paper, an academic style research paper that makes a point that you're not necessarily sure a politician would care about, then that's the goal of your policy brief, to figure out how to use your research to make a point that they care about. And that kind of goes back to that sentence. Like, you sit there and and I do this. I mean, I'll have 100 versions scratched out, but you just got to boil it down to a sentence that is compelling to, let's say, a legislator or a congressman. And they might not care about, I'm so not informed on healthcare, I can't even imagine what you do your research on, but they might care about strands of DNA, but they might care that it could save lives. So you just got to, you can use your research to write a policy brief on something that may not have really been your main point, but you can use your research and write in a manner that's persuasive when appropriate, or just more concise and simplify. I mean, a brief is supposed to be brief, and so basically, a policy brief is supposed to tell them what they should get out of your research paper. You're spoon feeding it,
So maybe what the researchers need to do is pull together a team of policy people, right, to come together and help you put it into a language, because that's what's happening in terms of all of the information that we know within the university. It never gets translated to the policy makers. So I think that's a great addition for somebody to add to the team, to make sure that when all this great information we have here at the university, it gets translated so that they can make intelligent decisions, about what really the research.
And then that's a great point. We have a young lady on our staff who's 25 and does not have expertise in any of the things we write on. So anytime we write a brief, we give it to her knowing that she knows nothing about it, and then she helps us identify, hey, people don't know what this means. I don't know this term. I'm not totally getting your point. And she kind of helps us figure out how to better communicate. So sometimes it's just a matter of handing it off to somebody without your background, letting them kind of assess it and, making changes as needed.
So I was just telling Ebony that the main staff person for one of the Jefferson County Commissioners who was leading the closing for Green did not know the term health disparities. We were in a coffee shop, and I was asked, I was like, Green is basically on this campus, and how is it that, and so we were in this coffee shop and we were asking something, I was like, oh, I'm doing health disparity talk, and he was like, oh, what's health disparity? Right. And I was like, oh, and I was like, you were influencing the shutdown of this.
They shut it down.
And you don't know.
They shut down.
Yeah, but it's true. There was something, I think, on the radio newspaper that people were
Any more questions?
And do y'all advise?
We'd be happy to help any way that we can. Seriously, we've both got business cards if there are any questions. But we will make sure that you all get a copy of our presentation, and hopefully that'll provide you some guidance once you sit down and start writing. So thank you so much for having us.
You guys again, I do want to give the folks who are joining us by phone and video conference an opportunity to unmute their lines and ask me the last question that they may have.
Sure, baby.
All right. Well, if not, we would really like to thank our guests today, Katherine and Andy, for joining us. As you guys know, we have a lot more people here than usually join our coalition meetings, and that's because we want wanted to make sure that we opened up this opportunity to other partners. As Bettina mentioned, we do a lot of work around eliminating health disparities with the Gulf State Project, but also with the Mid-South ECC and the REAP Project as well, and the MHRC's community outreach efforts as well. So, we found, I'm sure that the questions at the end really point to this, that, we have a need to better understand what is going to make a difference in terms of influencing policies around all of this great research that we're uncovering here in our area. So just the fact that you all were able to join us, they were very appreciative. And this was great information. So on behalf of the Gulf States Policy Center, our reach partners, the Mid-South UCC, and the MHRC, we'd like to present a certificate of appreciation to both of you guys for joining us today. And also, we'd like to present you with a little something of our Also, at this time, we're going to continue our coalition meeting for the next 10 minutes. And so we'd like to thank everyone who was able to join us by phone and by video conference. You will send me an email if you are interested in obtaining a copy of the slides from today's presentation. I'll be more than happy to send that to you. My email address is edmonsone@uae.edu. I'll be happy to send that to you. For those of us who are joining me from the Hattiesburg Coalition, the Value Battery Coalition, or any of the other coalitions that either Dr. Bright or David Patterson facilitate, then you can obtain a copy of the presentation from him, from the two of them. And we will disconnect call. Thank you all for joining us today.